Hello and welcome to the soil humidity sensor tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to connect the sensor to the Arduino board. Then we'll go over the sketch, and finally we will test the system. So let's begin. Let's start with going over the sensor kit. The sensor kit comes with three parts: the amplifier and the actual sensor that goes into the soil, and finally a 2-wire female to female cable. We will be using the cable to connect the sensor to the amplifier. You will notice that the amplifier has 2 pins labeled plus and minus, and the sensor also has two pins labeled plus and minus. We will use the cable to connect these pins together. You will also notice that the amplifier has 4 pins on the other side. The first one is labeled A0. This will be connected to the A0 pin on the Arduino board on the analog side. The next one is labeled GND, or ground, and this will be connected to the ground pin on the Arduino board. Finally, the VCC, and this will be connected to the 3.3 volt pin on the Arduino board. We will begin building our system by connecting 3 LEDs to the Arduino board like we did in the first tutorial, but this time we'll connect them to pins 2, 3, and 4. So let's do that. Okay, so this is the last wire. Wiring is done for the LEDs. Next, let's install the amplifier on the breadboard. Let's plug it in. And there we go. Now let's wire the amplifier. So like we said, 1 pin will go to ground, and the next pin will go to the 3.3 volts pin on the Arduino board, and finally we have our signal pin with the A0 pin. That will be our input to the Arduino. We will plug it in to pin A0. The wiring is done. The last thing that we have to do is to connect the amplifier to the sensor that goes into the soil. We will use our 2-wire female to female cable that came with the kit. So I've connected it to the amplifier, and I'm going to connect the other end to my sensor. The plus pin to the plus pin, and the negative pin to the negative pin. So now that's done, and all we have to do is to upload the code. So let's go to our sketch, but first let's connect our board to the computer using our USB cable. And now let's go to our sketch. So this is our sketch. We'll begin by defining constant integers to represent our LEDs. LED 1 is connected to pin 2, LED 2 is connected to pin 3, LED 3 is connected to pin 4 on the digital side of the Arduino board. And then we define the pin where we've connected our moisture sensor, and it's going to be connected to the A0 pin on the analog side. In the setup portion, we define our LED pins as output pins, and we also start the serial communication so we can communicate with the serial monitor using the Arduino IDE. In our loop section of our sketch, we begin by declaring a variable, an integer variable value, which will store the value read from the sensor, from the moisture sensor, and we use the analog read function to read the value coming from the moisture sensor. And then next, I use the serial.print functions to output the value read from the sensor to my serial monitor from the LED. This way, I'm going to test what values read by the sensor corresponds to what condition of wetness the soil is experiencing. So what I want to achieve is, the drier the soil, the more LEDs should be on, and the more wet the soil, the more humid the soil is, the less LEDs are turned on. So if the soil is very wet, no LEDs will be turned on, and if the soil is very dry, all LEDs have to turn on. So I'm using some if and else if statements to achieve that. And for example, in the first condition, I say if value is greater than or equal to 800, which means it's very dry, the resistance is very high between the two legs of the sensor, then all LEDs have to turn on. And my last condition, in my last condition, I say else if the value is between 0 and less than 250, which means it's very wet, very moist, then all LEDs are off. Now, keep in mind, I just arbitrarily put these values, so this will need some tweaking by looking at the serial monitor to achieve the desired result. My required result might be different from your required result. Okay, so I'm gonna upload the sketch and see the values that I'm getting in my serial monitor. Okay, I've uploaded the code. Let's start the serial monitor. The sensor is not connected to the soil, it's not in the soil, and yet you can see that I'm getting a value of 676. So the value that I've chosen to represent a very dry condition of 800 in my first if statement is not appropriate. In fact, now that I've stuck the sensor in the soil, I'm getting a reading of about 600. So I'm gonna need to do some tweaking to my values to be able to represent different conditions appropriately, different humidity conditions appropriately. Okay, so I have tested different conditions with a little bit of water as well, and I've decided that my very dry condition is greater than or equal to 600, and my very wet condition is between 0 and below 300. So I'm gonna adjust the rest of the values. I'm gonna make this one 300. So I'm gonna upload the new values, and my sensor is right now is connected to a part of the soil that's a little bit wet, and it's reading 320, 321, and so one LED is on. Now I'm gonna stick it somewhere else in the soil, and now I've got 2 LEDs on, and the reading is approximately 430. If I take it out, the reading is 676. I stick it back in, and again about 500. Now 2 LEDs are on. If I wet the soil, my reading goes down to about 196, 200, 215. I stick it someplace else, and I'm getting 350. If I clean the sensor, again I'm getting 676. All LEDs are on. So the system is working, and the LEDs are lighting according to my requirements. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.